Hi, I'm Tori, and today I am going to be discussing Chitty Chitty Bang Bang by Ian Fleming. So I listened to the audiobook of this story, which was narrated by David Tennant, and it was a wonderful narration. So this story is the book that the movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was based on. So it was written in 1964, and if Ian Fleming sounds a little familiar, that's because he's the author of the James Bond series. So this is a children's book written by the author of James Bond, and it is absolutely amazing. I loved it. So this book is so sweet and charming and amazing. It was wonderful to see this family. It's this very ordinary kind of family, except the father is an adventurer and inventor. And so, of course, they acquire the car Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and go on adventures with her. I loved, the father's name was Cracticus Pot, and everyone called him Crackpot. So in the beginning of the book, they tell you that it is dedicated to the real Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, who was an actual race car. I researched a bit about her. So they talk a little bit about the actual race car, and she was designed by a Count Zborowski in Canterbury in 1920, and she was put together from all these really cool parts that included an airplane engine from World War I, and they called it an aero engine, which is part of the reason in the book she's called an aero car. And I loved the quote from the beginning. They talked about the first Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was wrecked in an accident, and they talked about the year that she was out driving, which I think was 1921 or 22, and they say, but in that year, she was involved in an accident. This is a polite way of putting it. In fact, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang suddenly went mad with rage about something, and with the count at the wheel, got out of control and charged through the timing hut, very fast, backwards. So I just love that quote. It was a great way of putting it. It is actually what happened. If you look online, you can find all kinds of information about it. The Count actually built 2 more Chitty Chitty Bang Bangs after that. They were called Chitty 1, Chitty 2, and Chitty 3. And it's very interesting hearing all about them. And I've looked up pictures. It was a gorgeous car with all these little bits just stuck on to make it work. And it looked really cool. So I loved the idea that the author, who was fairly young when all this happened, saw that car and just loved it and wrote a whole story about it. And all through the book you can tell that he really likes cars, and he'll talk about taking proper care of Chitty and making sure that she had enough oil and enough petrol and she was properly cleaned, and just being very careful with her, checking all her tire pressure, checking all her gauges. And so it was really fun, and you actually did pick up quite a bit about cars, you know, just little things, listening to the story. So that was really fun. It was also written in kind of a serialized form. After I finished it, I looked it up and realized that it was like originally meant to be like 3 separate stories. And it's so much fun, these little adventures this family goes on. And the audiobook actually had great production value. It'd have ominous music play at the end of ominous chapters, or happy music play at the end of happy chapters, and it was really fun. And I loved several times, there were 2 different times the author did this, they would talk about how everything was great, and the family, which included Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, was just happy. And they were all going to be happy and continue what they were doing. But, and again, but. They used that line twice, and I just loved it. It was so great. And it was a way they would introduce fun, new, dastardly villains or horrible plot twists or something. And it was very fun. It was very much a little lighthearted children's adventure story, but then there'd be explosions and things. And it felt like it was written it was written like for a small, outdoorsy, rambunctious child, kind of, and it was great, very much like the stereotypical little boy or the little tom girl who wants to go riding around fixing cars. And the whole family at one point comes across a cave full of dynamite, and they think, okay, this is dynamite, and we know that it's owned by a gangster who robs banks, so what are we going to do? We're going to blow it up! And there's no real discussion about it, there's no thought, it's like, okay, we're on a family outing, now let's blow up this mountain! And it was just part of the story, and that was so great. It was so unique. I've never seen a children's story that would do that before, because most children's stories are trying to teach, you know, morals and responsibility and boring things like that. And this one was trying to talk about these people who were good people but like to blow stuff up. So that was very fun. My one complaint with this book is that I don't think Ian Fleming handles female characters very well. I've read also Casino Royale by him, and so those are the only two experiences I have with his writing, and I get the feeling that he very much believes that women are an important part of life and our culture, and that women are good for many, many things besides cooking, cleaning, and bearing children. And he can't really think of any of those things right now, but if you give him a minute, he could definitely come up with one of them. Yeah, there must be something, right? I know he knows they're good for something. It's just he can't think what it is right now. Next question, please. And so he made a point of saying that Mimsy, the mother, was an adventurous woman and was not, you know, just your run-of-the-mill person. She was exciting and fun too. And he told us that, and he said that, and you could tell she had an adventurous side because she had married Mr. Potts. And no one who was boring would marry him, so that her only interesting trait came from the person she was married to, which isn't a great way to show character development. And they told us that she was interesting, but in reality, she was the one who was always saying, "Oh, I'm concerned. Oh, that seems unsafe." And what they were doing was definitely unsafe. And I don't think any parent, mother or father, would want their children to be doing what the little kids in this book were doing, because it's not safe. But it was shown as her just kind of being the nag, and Mr. Potts saying, "Oh, it's fine," and the children saying, "Oh, it's fine. Please, can we have fun, Mom?" And I didn't like that. I didn't like that her only job was to be the kind of worrywart, because that's what mothers do, and she was still going to go along with these things. She didn't actually think they were that dangerous. She was just the one who had to point out, these things are dangerous. I don't want this to get too fun. And I didn't like that about it. So, but this book was written in the 60s, and so it is a product of its time. And for that time period, it wouldn't have been a big deal. And I'm sure there were lots of other books written during that time period that represented women in far worse ways. So, and you could tell it was trying. It wanted to say she was adventurous. It knew that you had to let women be adventurous too. It just hadn't figured out how. So it was a good try, just not quite. Oh, I also found it interesting that this book was published and written during the Cold War, when, you know, so they make little mentions to things like Sputnik and, you know, things can, you know, there are bombs in the world and things like that. But then this family, just regardless of all this stuff, just takes their flying car and goes zooming around and is like, "Oh yeah, you know, the military might see us and think we're some kind of a bomb or something, but we're not worried about that." So it was a very kind of, oh, let's protect, you know, it was acknowledging, the book definitely was set in the time it was written. The Cold War was definitely going on. It was definitely a concern. But the family's attitude was kind of, oh, if we don't think about it, it won't be too much of a problem. And so I thought it was very interesting to see that, you know, it felt to me like Ian Fleming was a little annoyed with all the Cold War stuff and wished that people could just go on living their lives and wouldn't have to deal with all this stuff. And so it was kind of interesting to see that part of it. So this book does have sequels, but they were written by another person in the 2000s. So I may read them someday, but I definitely think of this as a standalone work because the author intended it that way and didn't write anything else. He unfortunately died the year this book was published, and while he was getting it published and doing all of the tweaks and stuff, he was recovering from a heart attack, and he never did recover all the way. That's why he died soon thereafter. And so I wish that he could have continued it on. And after a little break, I might go on and read the books written by another person, but right now I just want to let this kind of sit in my head because it's what is actually written by this author. And so I'll give it a little time so I can read the other books as kind of like a fan fiction sort of thing that's sort of set in the same world but not really canon is how I'm going to think of it. So this book was so delightful. It was just the cutest story. I love the writing style. It was incredibly entertaining and incredibly fun to read. And I hope it becomes more popular. I really liked it. This was a great book, and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is an awesome car.